Today I'm going to use a right triangle to define for you the 6 trigonometric functions. Now, to begin with, let's just draw a right triangle, and I'll identify an angle here. I'll call this angle theta, just for reference. Now, remember, all right triangles have the side opposite the right angle is called the hypotenuse. So all right triangles have a hypotenuse. And then, any angle that you choose in this triangle has an opposite side. And we'll just refer to that as the opposite side. And then the remaining side we'll call the adjacent side. So we have the hypotenuse, the side opposite, and then the side adjacent. Now, having named these sides, we're ready to define the trig functions. And I'll start off by talking about sine, spelled S-I-N-E, and abbreviated S-I-N. So we have here sine of theta. Now, what this means is, when we see sin theta, sine of theta, that just means the ratio of the opposite side to the hypotenuse. That's all that means. It just means that ratio. So the sine of theta is equal to the length of the opposite side over the length of the hypotenuse. Okay? Likewise, the cosine. The cosine of theta would be the ratio of the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. So that's what the cosine is, the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. And then we have tangent. The tangent theta would be the adjacent on the bottom and the opposite on the top. So it would be the opposite over adjacent. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And tangent is opposite over adjacent. Now, sine, cosine, and tangent, those are the 3 trigonometric functions that you'll encounter the most. And in fact, sometimes when you're first introduced to the trigonometric functions, those are the only 3 you're given, like in maybe a first course in geometry or something like that. But we also have their reciprocals. We have what's called the cosecant. Now remember, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Well, cosecant, abbreviated CSC theta, is the reciprocal of that. So it would be hypotenuse over opposite. So remember, cosecant is just the reciprocal of sine. And then we have secant, which is the reciprocal of cosine. Remember, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So secant, abbreviated SEC theta, secant of theta, would be hypotenuse over adjacent. So it's kind of counterintuitive. The sine and cosecant go together, and the cosine and secant go together. You would think that the cos would go together. You would think that cosine and cosecant would go together. So you can remember it as not being what you would think. Sine goes with cosecant, and cosine goes with secant. Okay? So cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, and secant is the reciprocal of cosine. Now, the last one is cotangent. Remember, tangent is opposite over adjacent. Cotangent is adjacent over opposite. So this one is the way you would think. You would think cotangent would go with tangent, and it does. It's the reciprocal. So we have tangent is opposite over adjacent, cotangent is adjacent over opposite. Now if you look at these 6 together, here's what we have. And these are what we need to remember. Remember sine, cosine, and tangent, and then their reciprocals. So sine, opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine, adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent, opposite over adjacent. And then remember their reciprocals. So here, sine, opposite over hypotenuse. So cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite. Cosine, adjacent over hypotenuse. Secant, hypotenuse over adjacent. Tangent, opposite over adjacent. Cotangent, adjacent over opposite. So if you remember these primary ones right here, sine, cosine, and tangent, then remember which reciprocal goes with which function, and you'll have the 6.